A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
This December, the International Justice Mission is running a campaign called Dressember, and it's all about rescuing and empowering women trapped in different forms of slavery. And the Chief Advocacy Officer for IJM, Grace Wong, joins me now. Grace, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
Grace, a couple of questions, and I'll start with the first one. For our listeners that aren't familiar with the International Justice Mission, tell us what you do.
Absolutely. Well, International Justice Mission is a non-for-profit organisation that's based in 19 countries across the world. And basically, we're trying to protect people from violence. It might be everyday violence. It might be extreme forms of violence and exploitation, but we're concerned with people who don't get protected by their local justice systems, and we're trying to strengthen and improve those justice systems so that they can function properly and help protect more people in the society that those justice systems are based in.
Yeah, wonderful. And what is Dressember? Tell me about that.
Dressember is a partnership that IJM has been engaged in over 11 years. It's basically a style challenge, Andrew. So we want you to make a statement with your outfit over 31 days of December. That could be a bow tie, some shoes, wearing the same dress or a number of dresses as I'm doing over December. But it's basically aimed at raising awareness and funds to combat human trafficking. It's a conversation starter to help people know and understand that human trafficking and slavery exists even today, and that there's a need for fair labour in the fashion industry in particular.
Okay, so you're saying that for the whole month of December, women are wearing a different dress every day, correct?
Yes, or some women here at IJM Australia are wearing the same dress with some washing in between. But it's a fun challenge to help us, know and understand the power of how an outfit can shape a conversation and to start a conversation about women and children in particular who are exploited and trafficked on an everyday basis in jurisdictions all across the world.
Yeah, because there are different forms of slavery, aren't there? I mean, there's obviously sexual slavery, but there's also the slavery in relation to forced employment or bonded labour, and that is a big issue in the world today, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, Walk Free estimates that about 2/3 of all forced labour cases across the world are linked to global supply chains for a whole range of industries and products that we consume every day, Andrew. And most of all, prominently, the garment or the fashion sector in particular can have a number of issues to do with exploitation of migrant workers or even poor labourers who go and have their, work and labour exploited by someone local who often is producing the garment or the cotton that a piece of clothing that I'm wearing, for example, my white dress at the moment, now. So what we're really trying to do at a systemic level is to make sure that law enforcement officials are empowered to know and understand how to detect those cases, that people can report labour exploitation where they're not given the freedom to leave, they're not given the freedom to have fair and decent wages that reflect the work that they're putting into labour or garment making. And also that they're not able to necessarily leave because they might have a debt that has been incurred and built up over time gradually to help imprison them, I suppose, in some ways, in that same situation. And they're not free to leave in the same way. That's what we would call forced labour or debt bondage.
Yeah, their freedom has been taken away. Their personal liberty has been taken away from them, and they're forced to work, as you said, in an industry. And it's just awful, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as Christians, we often feel a little bit powerless in this case and think in some ways with Wilberforce that slavery was abolished and it doesn't exist now in the world that we live in today. But now more than ever, Andrew, there's over 50 million people in modern slavery across the world, more than there was in the transatlantic slave trade when it existed in Wilberforce's time. And one of the things I'm really encouraged about is that IJM encourages Christians and churches across the world to take a leadership and a stance on modern slavery in the same way that our predecessors did, and to know that the dignity and the value of each human being, whether you're a worker in a factory in Bangalore in India or whether you're a worker here, deserves to be recognised and uplifted.
Yeah, 100%. And don't you love the story of Wilberforce? Tell me when you first came across the story of Wilberforce.
Well, actually, it was when I was studying my master's degree. Believe it or not, he was part of the curriculum as part of the anti-slavery degree that I was doing with the University of Nottingham in the UK. And he was, I guess, an inspiration as one of the first leaders of the anti-slavery movement. And they say there's sort of like 4 different anti-slavery movements across the world that have happened, and we're in the 4th one right now, but he was part of the first. And it was really inspiring to me because I didn't realize that his movement was actually like the spearhead of a greater movement across the Methodist Church and a number of really prominent clergymen and politicians in the UK at the time who were really inspired by stories of slaves themselves who went around and spoke to huge crowds about the atrocity of them being enslaved and being packed onto these ships, shipped across to the Caribbean, etc., and put on sugarcane farms. It was awful, but he was such a prominent person who knew that his power could lead to something great, and he exercised it, in coordination with a whole bunch of other churches in alliance to raise an awareness about the issue and then to get the public to care about it and then the parliament to do something about it by abolishing the slave trade.
Yeah, and he fought so hard, didn't he? And a lot of people don't realise, because you can look at him as a historical figure, but he was a very strong Christian. And like you, I haven't done a master's degree, Grace, so I'm not in your calibre, but I have done a degree in history, and I was doing something about Wilberforce in uni, and I was in a university library reading about him, and what struck me about him is that he used to worship in his home, and he'd get his whole family together around the piano, and even up until his later years when he was almost ready to go to heaven, they'd get around the piano and he would lead the praise and lead the worship. He was a very enthusiastic worshipper. And I remember I was in the University of Queensland in the library there, Grace, and I started crying. I started reading this story about this guy that just gave his life to slaves and gave his life to fighting that injustice, but also that he was such a fervent Christian. He just loved God so much that he was actually a worshipper as well.
Absolutely. I think something that I'm really challenged about his faith is this idea that we long for the world to come and the transformation of our earth and the rejuvenation of everything that has happened since sin has kind of infected it, so to speak. But there is work to be done here and now, and God has given us that mission and the resources to do it. And I'm really glad that Dressember and IJM challenges us as Christians to, like Wilberforce, really take up that active step in faith and to know that we can be making a difference to transform and change the way in which people are exploited or made vulnerable here, while still longing for everything that's going to come in new creation. So, yeah, I think that balance and that passion can still be there.
Yeah, 100%. And International Justice Mission, as you said, is involved in the fight today, because isn't it interesting that, Wilberforce had a win, but here we are today. There's more slavery today than there ever was. Can you give me a recent story of a survivor of bonded labour? I think there's a guy called Carter in India who IGM was able to help get out of a really bad situation.
Yeah, I would love to, Andrew. So Qatar was based in Bangalore in India, and it's very similar to, I guess, a lot of the stories that we hear in Australia and across the region. He lived with his mother and a number of siblings and didn't have any care responsibilities until his father died when he was quite young, and he decided that he would pick up tailoring because his uncle was a proficient tailor, and he learned this skill over a number of years, and eventually sort of reached his 20s and got married. And when his wife became pregnant with their first child, really wanted to provide more for their family, knowing that they would need more income. he accepted a job at a nearby town, which promised him basically 3 or 4 times what he was being paid currently. So he took up the job, but unfortunately, when he got there, realised that they had advanced him some wages so that he could travel there and get settled into the work, but then reduced his wages significantly, and he began to accumulate all of this debt while working for them, even though he was working for 12 hours a day, every day, without breaks and without a time to really see his family except very, very late at night. He was still accumulating all of this debt and just couldn't pay it off and was trapped basically in it. So even though he had the physical ability to go home at night, he was threatened with abuse and violence, and especially because his family was in the area too. And it was a small town that he was working in. Everyone kind of knew each other. And he knew that they would be, faking the brunt of that factory owner's abuse if he did leave. So he stayed in that situation for up to 2 years. And at night, he would often, when he couldn't make it home, he would go to the train station and just cry or ask a complete stranger to use their phone so that he could call his wife. And when he asked a stranger one time if he could call his wife and explained a little bit about his situation, that stranger actually turned out to be an IJM worker in Bangalore and said, look, I think the situation that you're in is debt bondage, is labour exploitation. Please, contact me and get your wife to contact me and we'll see what we can do. And so a few weeks and months passed, and eventually one day he was so sick he couldn't work, but the factory owner locked him in the factory and forced him to continue working on these garments until he could produce the amount of garments that he normally did when he wasn't sick. And his wife got so worried she called International Justice Mission, who then spoke to the local officials and got them to go down there and to assess his case and to bring him in for questioning and evidence. And he was incredibly scared at first to speak out against his abuser, but he did eventually, and they took his report. They brought in the trafficker or the factory owner for questioning, tried to convict him, couldn't get the evidence that they needed to, but in many ways, Kader managed to not go back, and IJM also managed to help him go through what we call a restoration program or an aftercare program with social workers so that he could be equipped and sort of ready to go into the next phase of work, and also supplied him a sewing machine so he could start up his own tailoring business, very separate from any of the factories that he'd been previously working in. So, I mean, I'm really joyful when I tell that story because I think it seems to start so small, but it had such incredible impact on Kader to not be, at the whim of his factory owner anymore and to be given the opportunity to cater for himself and for his family. I'm always challenged by that because you think about how much value someone has as the image of God, and the degradation that they suffer in that situation when they're not given, like you said, the freedom and the ability to interact with their family, to pursue the things that they love and they know they can do with the hands God has given them. It's just so challenging. But thank goodness that he's in the position that he is in now, and he's got a healthy baby boy in the family too. We really enjoy those stories because it just shines a little bit of a light into what seems to be an extreme and a huge problem across the world.
Yeah, it's a great story and it's a great example of the great work that International Justice Mission does. And if anyone listening right now wants to find out more about the International Justice Mission, they can go to the website, which is ijm.org.au. Maybe one of our listeners wants to get involved in Dressember. Find out all about it on the website, ijm.org.au, and that is the International Justice Mission. And we have been speaking to the Chief Advocacy Officer, Grace Wong. Grace, I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 Today.
It was my absolute pleasure, Andrew. Thank you so much, and hope to see many of you join Dressember.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.